failure was not an option. When I was with Delta, no was not a word, or I can't was not a word. You take care of those widows, you take care of those families, you do whatever you got to do. And that's kind of been a theme throughout most of my life is no's not an option. Now, yes, there are times we can't do certain things, but it's not the default word. You just go forward and you make it happen, because the only easy day was yesterday.
Well, good morning, everyone. Great to be together again. Excited to spend time with Mike Thompson, who I met back in the fall and was just amazed by a life of service. You know, somebody that you just can't stop serving others. It seems like it's been a commitment from the beginning, and you've done so many interesting things and spent so much of your career both serving your country and serving others. I just know there are a ton of lessons that you've got to share with us that are relevant today. I want to go back to the beginning. You were a SEAL before SEALs were cool. It seems like everybody knows about the SEALs these days because of the Dan Crenshaws and Jocko Willinks and Leif Babbins. But you were you preceded all those guys and went into the SEALs. So let's talk about your early journey. What inspired you to go into the Navy and then took you to the SEALs, and what was that like? What did you learn back then in SEAL Team 2?
Okay. To date myself, I go back to class 84. So that's important when you talk to SEAL team guys, is you find out what BUDS class they were in. And there were still UDT teams at that time. And I don't know if anybody saw 2 weeks ago, Richard Marcinko died. Well, he was my first commander at SEAL Team 2. So that kind of dates myself. But how it got started was my dad worked for Santa Fe Railroad. I was born out of Oklahoma, but he was transferred to Galveston, Texas. We lived a block off the beach. And for young boys, you couldn't have it any better. And so I grew up in the water. And I don't know if anybody is old enough. I'm looking here. I don't think they are. But you remember Mike Nelson and Sea Hunt was on TV. And so that's what I watched. And also the news when they did the space shots and the capsules would land in the water. And then those were the UDT team guys that would jump in. And well, that's how it started for me. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a frogman. And so that was, and I always liked the Navy. My dad was Coast Guard. And so there was an influence there from several of his siblings, and, you know, that got me started with the Navy. And so that's how it began. And so I'd always wanted to go SEAL team or UDT team, wanted to be a frogman.
What was that like back in the, you know, it's pretty well chronicled today about how difficult BUDS is, but what was that experience like for you, and what did you learn that you carried with you for the rest of your life from just that resilience and grit and perseverance of that process?
Well, there were two things that were really monumental for me. One is that I don't know if anybody has heard about the bell they have at BUDS training. And it's a bell that's on a wall on they call it the grinder. It's just an asphalt, like a big parking lot. That's where we did our physical training. And behind us was the wall of this building, and it had the bell, a brass bell on it. And there was a sign under it. It said, volunteer in, volunteer out. So if you wanted to leave, you go up and ring the bell. Well, one of the things that I had done was, first of all, one of the things that I did at the time, but I realized it became one of my characteristics for leadership, was commitment. When you go into something, you commit to it. And that's what I did. I committed to making it through BUDS. Now, that didn't guarantee that I made it through BUDS, but I determined in my mind that I would not ring the bell. That was not an option for me. Death on the beach from running, or they running me off because I wasn't meeting the standards. Those were the only other two options. And when we ran down the beach, I'd look out into the off San Diego, and I'd see the ships, and that kept me running. I did not want to go back to the fleet, and I wanted to be a frogman. The other thing, the second thing that made a difference, we had this motto that everybody we made fun of, or it was fun, but it became part of who I was. I came to live by it. And that was, the only easy day is yesterday. The only easy day was yesterday. And what that came to mean for us was, okay, you passed the run yesterday, but today's a new run. In other words, even in life, there are new things. Each day is a new day. And it kind of fits with the old saying about you can't rest on your laurels. Yesterday was yesterday's. What you did, that's over. You face new challenges. You face new things in life. In training, we faced a new run, different running the obstacle course or something like that. So you had to concentrate on that today. You can't look back. So those were two main things that were pretty monumental for me coming through BUDS training. BUDS is basic underwater demolition / SEAL training. So I'll just call it SEAL training.
Are there any events? I know there was an event I saw on your Facebook page. Someone had left a message about a boat wreck where you had to jump into the water into the middle of the night and save some guys. Maybe talk about that story and what you're thinking about in that time of where you don't worry about your own safety, you're worried about other folks.
Well, and I appreciate you mentioning that, because for me, that was a moving time, a moving moment for me. And the 45th anniversary of that was the 17th of this month. 1977, January 17th of 1977, there was a boat accident in Barcelona, Spain. There were 49 Navy Marine Corps personnel that were killed. They were on a Liberty launch that was coming out of Barcelona Harbor, and the boat coxswain swung wide out into the channel, and they were run over by a Spanish freighter. Now, with ships like that, it's not an impact as much as the water in front of the bow of the larger ship rolls up and swells. And so it rolled the boat and threw everybody out. It was one of those boats that you see in Normandy on D-Day with the open top and the front ramp drops down. It was that type of a boat. And so it dumped everybody out. Of course, being Navy, they were probably all had been drinking quite a bit. And so that didn't help things any, but it was late at night. It was a Liberty launch and everybody was coming back to the ship, which was anchored out in the harbor. We were on board, our detachment. We were the first time that the SEAL teams rode on the ships. Usually they flew everywhere, but this was after Vietnam, and we were fighting for our existence. So we said, well, we can do what the UDT teams are doing. And there was a UDT team on another ship. They were in a different port. They woke us all up. We went in for the rescue operation. They determined there were still people under the boat. It was capsized and it was floating upside down. And there were still 6 people inside, and then 9 were inside that had died. And so as we went in, there were 3 of us went into the water. I went under the boat and went into the under the boat. Excuse me, just a second. I'm sorry. I thought I cleaned up, sterilized the room. But went under the boat and we pulled the six out. One guy stayed underwater. I went up underneath. They were all in shock. And so I just had to, I violated all sorts of diving rules, like taking my mask off, taking your air and putting it over your shoulder, and getting around people like that, because nobody could understand what you were trying to tell them. They were in shock. They'd been in the water for several hours and it was cold. And so I just had to kind of they all had these grips on this railing. And so I had to get the hands off the railing, and then I just swam backwards and then dunked them. You can't rationalize with them or tell them, hold your breath. You just dunk them. And the guy that was below the surface grabbed them, took them up to a guy that was without tanks, and then did a swimmer's carry and took them in. Then we cleared out those who had died. And so to this day, I still see one of them very clearly, his face. And so that 17th was the 45th anniversary of that. And that's not one we hear about very often.
No, but I assume in that moment there, you've prepared yourself in advance. You're going to do whatever it takes. You're not really spending time thinking about your own safety in that situation. You were already pre-committed.
Well, yes. And it goes back to something I forgot to mention about Bud's training. That became 6 months long. And so what they did is things became natural. Go get in the water. You stay wet. You're cold. Well, that night it was a muscle memory. You just do what you've got to do. And that was the purpose of Bud's training, or SEAL team training. When you get into situations like that, then you operate out of muscle memory, and you don't think about it. Now, you're cautious. You look at it. It's not that you are blind to any type of safety or anything. It's not that. It's just that you do what you have to do and make it happen.
I want to come back to that in a little bit, but right now let's if you've got questions, type them in the chat. Let's go to Drew.
Hey, Mike, I didn't put dates to your time until you brought the dates up yourself, but I'm curious, with the failed rescue attempt for the hostages in Iran back in '80, there was a significant shift. And I say shift because our military really culturally has gotten so good at being humble to the fact that we can always get better. Did you sense any of that? I don't even know. I mean, it's a fascinating question, which is, did they bring this up in your training as a SEAL on how to get better and the lessons learned, or was it something that was just inherent that had already been done by 1982 when you started?
If I understand your question right, it's something. It's like what I described about the boat accidents. We always did lessons learned, and with the Army, we always, you get through at Fort Polk or wherever, you sit down and you do your lessons learned. We did that, and so what that does is, if you do it enough, you start doing it on your own. I fix the lawnmower and I think, okay, how could I have done that better? It becomes part of who you are. And that's a lot of the, as behind military training is you start getting to think that way. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I still do that.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious as to if there was ever discussions or even parts of your training that talked about that failed mission and lessons learned from it as part of your training and growth as a Navy SEAL.
I apologize. I still might not be understanding your question.
Yeah,
I just know about the Iranian hostage crisis. I think he's referring to, and the failed mission in Iran, and dealing with the world of terrorism at that time.
Oh, I thought you were talking about here coming out of Afghanistan.
No, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. The 1980 rescue of
Okay.
that obviously failed, and we had 8 service members from our national level
Yeah.
forces that were killed. That restructured all the training of our special operators.
Well,
And SEALs were a part of that. I was just
yeah.
curious if there was any specific pieces that you all were told this has been added because of our failed attempts in 1980.
Not from the Navy standpoint. I had gotten out by then, but more from when I went to the Army. See, it did structure training. It restructured training, and it restructured the organizations, and how the organizations were. Well, a lot of them were born out of that, and some of your special operation units were born out of that. So yes, there was always, you do things differently, and that was a mile marker right there, Desert One. And I've got a picture, and it talks about the guts to try. And there's things I'm not saying because I was with Delta, and I could say that now. See, it's more from that angle that I learned more about what went on in Iran. And yes, there definitely was a change in training, mindset, and organization. Every one of them.
So you left the SEALs. What brought that about, leaving the SEAL teams?
Well, that is a hard story to understand or help people to understand. But it was, I believe, as I look back, I grew up in a church home. I grew up with my faith, and I joined the Navy to retire from the Navy. But at that time, when it came 4 years, I just felt led to get out of the Navy. Now, I was not living for the Lord at that time. I was living like a sailor, and but I didn't understand why I felt like I needed to get out of the Navy. And it was just, that's the best I can explain it. I needed to get out. Well, I look back after coming into ministry, and I'll mention that here in a little bit. I believe that God did not give me a peace about the things that I was doing. He was waiting for me. I was to go back into a different way of serving people. And it had more to do with my faith and coming back and serving God. Because like I said, my parents, we went to church. That's where my faith started. And my dad, they lived their faith. I saw that from my mom and my dad. And on my website or on the Facebook, there's a video. I'm at the cemetery, and I'm kind of giving tribute and honor to my parents because they raised me with those characteristics of relating to people. So why I got out of the Navy, I can say now, I believe God didn't give me a peace about it. I joined the Navy to retire from the Navy. But then I get out of the Navy and I go to a police department. So it still is a continuous journey. So, but I regret at times that I would like to have stayed in, and I was offered a job at Bud's Training in the diving phase, and because we had tested a diving rig, so I was familiar with that. I was one of the first ones to dive it, and so I did hate to leave, but something told me I had to. I look back now, it was the Lord.
So you left there, you were a policeman, you were a chaplain, then you went back to the Army. I
did. I came back to Kansas City area, and we had said we'd never come back to Kansas City. And so never say never. There's a life lesson. And I saw a friend of mine that I went to school with, and he said, well, what are you going to do now? And I said, oh, I don't know. I'm looking for a job. He said, why don't you be a police officer? I said, okay. he said, there's an opening at Lenexa. And that's kind of how it went. And so I went and applied and was accepted at Lenexa Police Department and served there for several years. But then, like I was talking about how I was living, I'm a prodigal son story. I came back to my faith. But during that time, my wife and I divorced, and we were divorced for a year. And we had a little girl, and then we remarried after a year. And I said, I need to get out of here. We need to start over. And so we went to Oklahoma, where I was born, in the town that I never really lived in. And that's where I kind of got started again, started going back to church, started living my faith. And I was a contract welder in the oil fields. Now, let me say right off, right up front here is, I'm not proud of going from one thing to another, but it has given me a life experience that as a chaplain, I ministered out of. But the funny thing about it, what I wanted to mention was my mother, everything's a matter of perspective. My mother says, when are you going to settle down and pick something you want, that you're going to work at? When are you going to grow up? I said, well, I hope never. And, and I'm having fun. So, but each of those things contribute to who you are. Everything in life that you do, I believe, adds to who you are, and everything's connected. And so I was a police officer, and then we remarried and went to Oklahoma, and that was a new transition. That was kind of a new start. And on the police department, same thing happened. I just felt like the Lord was saying, this is not where I want you. And so we kept moving and ended up in Oklahoma.
And then how did all that steer into becoming a chaplain?
Well, I started, I bought 40 acres. I was going to be a cowboy, get a bunch of cows. And, I'd always wanted to live out in the country, and I liked Paul's Valley. We'd go visit our grandparents. And that was my big plan for life. And, but in the meantime, I had to have a job. So I started, I was a contract welder in the oil fields. I bought a truck, and I had learned to weld when I was in the Navy back before I went to SEAL team training, and started contract welding. And oil fields were booming then. If you remember back about 1979 and 80, it was just really busted wide open. And then the oil field shut down overnight. And that's when I went in town and opened up a welding shop. Now, during that same time, I started going back to church. And it's interesting how that happened. I first got there and I lived with my grandparents, but they went to church, and I didn't have the heart to say, no, I'm not going with you. And so I went with them. And that's how I kind of got started back, with realizing that I had gotten away from the Lord. And then it was just kind of, I'm trying to kind of shorten this a little bit because there's a lot. I was asked to be a Sunday school teacher, and I said yes. And I really liked teaching and relating. A test of your faith was, would you teach 7th and 8th grade boys? Well, that'll test your faith. And so that's kind of how it started. And I started working with the youth, and I had the 40 acres. We were going to live and die there, and that was going to be it. But then I felt a call to ministry. And by that time, I had a welding shop going and loved welding. Something that I applied to life that I learned out of the welding shop was the fact that, welding, I was pretty good at welding, but the more I learned, the more I realized I didn't know. And there's sometimes in life, the more we learn about life and the more we learn, then we see how much more we don't know. There's so much more out there. And so it's always, every day is a learning experience. The only easy day was yesterday. See how all that fits together. And so that's how I end up coming into ministry. And then it further escalated or developed into ministry back in the military. And I mentioned that to my wife. And of course, she was not in favor of that and said the Lord will have to change her mind. And so from the time I felt called to the time I went back on active duty was 9 years. Now, in those 9 years, I went to seminary. I ended up working in 4 different hospitals. I never really looked at wanting to be in a hospital from a ministry standpoint, but I look back and see how much that had prepared me for the future. And I'll mention about specifically what that was, but that's how I ended up back in the military as a chaplain. I went back on active duty. I was a staff chaplain at Norfolk General Hospital, and my supervisor really had good insight. She said, you need to put your application in for active duty. And she said, it's not that you're trying to get away from something, but it's that you're going to something. You're being called to something. And that's the way it's always been. I was going towards things all my life. That's kind of the way it's been. And in the meantime, I look back now, in the meantime, all of that going to was serving people. And that was what really made the difference for me. But I went back on active duty. I was accepted, and I went back on active duty when I was 42. So depend on, if you kind of imagine where you are now age-wise, if you're around 42. I went back on 42. I went to 82nd Airborne, started jumping out airplanes. That was in 92. Hadn't done that since 77 with the Navy. And so that's how I ended up back with the Army, and then did 18 and a half years with the Army. I continued to jump, went from the 82nd Airborne to 7th Special Forces Group. That was a little easier jumping with them. They had helicopters, not the C-141s or, the high-speed aircraft where it jerks a knot in your neck when you go out. But enjoyed that. And then just different units in the military that I was a command chaplain for. Very rewarding ministry. People in the military, I learned a lot in the hospital setting, and I took that with me also to the military. And so, when I came into ministry, I used all of Moses's excuses for not coming into ministry. And one of them was, well, look at my past life. And God said, you will minister out of your past. And so that was a way of redeeming the past. It wasn't just water under the bridge. So another kind of a lesson in life for me was I always looked at the here and now situations, and I could relate to things in my past. Well, this happened then, or I depended on the Lord then at that time, or this is what we did during that time. So I use that today for myself also, but also it helped me relate to people. So from 90% of what I did in the military was counseling, and 90% of my counseling was marriage. So if you think back to the things I said, I do ramble a lot, but all that had meaning. It built up to this point of, now I'm counseling people. Oh, where did that hospital time come in? And what was the purpose of that? And I'm going, that was, you talk about a sidetrack. But I ended up with Delta Force in 04 to 08. I left Drew. I left. I was with CGSC for the year at Leavenworth, and then went back to Fort Bragg and went to Delta Force. And then we were going in and out of, I was 58 years old then, and going in and out of Iraq. I made 13 trips in and out of Iraq. And with the unit that I was with, they were short rotations. During 05 was one of our worst years. We lost 10 soldiers. And in a small unit like that, that was worse than battles in the past. Especially Desert One. That's when we started engaging in those lessons learned from Desert One. We did do things different. Jointly, you worked differently with the other services, and you learn to work with people from other agencies and other walks of life. And so I was the solo chaplain with the unit, and we had 10 deaths and 8 of them were married. And so I came back from overseas each time to a new widow. And so you see how the hospital, my specialty in the hospital setting was grief. And that was and that was one that I never would have picked. One area that I never would have chosen to go into. But that's how the Lord kind of led and directed me. No, you're not going to stay in SEAL team. You're coming this direction. And so I see how it paid off. I see how, when the Lord, and I didn't hear an audible voice from the Lord saying, you will minister out of your past. It was one of those things you just know. You come to understand. And those were the times then that whether it was the boat accident in Barcelona or in Iraq, with those, one night we lost 3 at the same time. And, it's just, you jump in the water. You don't stand around and wonder how cold it is or how you jump in and get after it. And, I hear people nowadays with, and I'm sounding like an old guy now, you hear old guys say, well, when I was young, we walked uphill both ways to school. Well, it seems like, today it's not, the commitment is missing. Failure was not an option. When I was with Delta, no was not a word, or I can't was not a word. You take care of those widows, you take care of those families, you do whatever you got to do. And that's kind of been a theme throughout most of my life is no's not an option. Now, yes, there are times we can't do certain things, but it's not the default word. You just go forward and you make it happen, because the only easy day was yesterday. I'm sorry, I can get rambling, Randy, so you have to give me the high sign or something. But
no, it's good lessons there. But thinking about that time in Iraq, particularly, you're dealing with a lot of trauma, dealing with a lot of grief, and a lot of people that are very type A and aren't, probably aren't oriented towards being vulnerable and talking about trauma and grief. So how do you help coach people through those tough times, and think about how that applies to today and how we deal with people with trauma and grief?
Sure. First of all, you have to build trust. I learned early on in the hospital setting, I'd be naive to think that I could just walk into a room or a relationship with a person and think that they're going to talk to me about the deep things in their life that are going on. Excuse me. What you have to do is build relationships, and that applies to anybody. Think back over a close friend that you have, and how did, and a close friend divulges something that's deep and meaningful to you. How'd that happen? Well, it's because you built the relationship with them, and you earned their trust. And so I had to build bridges, and that's what I called it, is relationship bridge building. Now, the units, being with SEAL team and being in some of the other previous units, helped me. People said, well, that must have made it easy for you. Well, no, it shortened the bridge building time. But you would go in, and so what I had to do is you listen to see what's going on with people. You let them tell you. You open, it's more listening than telling. and you let them share with you what's going on in their life. And once you've built that relationship, then they will share. Now, one of the unique things about being a chaplain is we go different places. Now, you can, as a chaplain, you can pitch a tent and stay in one unit, but that's not advisable. What you want to do is go to multiple types of unit, and you learn the different people. I was in a transportation unit, a special operations unit, and infantry type unit with 1st Infantry. And every one of them, there's some unique situations, but something I learned in training for the hospital, and it was a project that I did, and that is common elements in ministry. There are certain things that are the same no matter what environment you're in or what situation. So you start learning about those types of things, but it still always was built on relationships and building the bridge and getting people to trust you. Now, here's the important thing is that who crosses the bridge and when? Well, it's their bridge, and they tell you when to cross, or they will, in their mind, say it's time to cross and come into my office. So they determine when you cross the bridge. The other thing is, in Delta, and I've got to be careful what I say. I can't say a whole lot, but I am allowed to talk just a little bit. They were older people, and I think that's a well-known fact. When you have older soldiers, there is more of a maturity level there. And that's not a negative against the younger soldiers, by all means. But when you're dealing with, think back when you kind of passed through the early 30s. Somewhere, I have a belief that from about 28 to 35, you start doing a lot of changing in life. You look at things different. And from a faith standpoint, you struggle with your faith. There's a struggling there that is a good, healthy struggle. And that happens about that time. Well, a lot of those guys were older, and so it was a whole lot easier. Once you built their trust, and I spent a long time building trust, and you had to have patience, then they would talk to you. And so that was kind of how I did that. But that also applied in 82nd or in the transportation unit. You built that trust, and then they came across the bridge.
I hear a lot of what you describing sound like empathy, not telling everybody about how tough you had it, but just listening to them and using your experiences to relate to them.
That's exactly what it is. It's all about them. And you have toolbox that you use to work out of. Absolutely. And that has to be it.
Yeah. Let's go over to Kurt.
Hey, thanks for getting Mike with us today, Randy. I appreciate that. And Mike, again, thank you for your service to the country, those folks, and even to the Lord. So I like the way you've brought that together. So along that empathetic theme and listening to others and trying to understand, how do we apply some of your vast experience and some of those lessons that we can all apply, but how do we apply it in, as we're sitting in our basements and the division that's going on in society today? I mean, what's the right path to take without being part of that divisiveness? Because hell, I got the right answer. Well, maybe not, right? So I could tell y'all what the right answer is about the vaccine or whatever, but that's not the right approach, right? So I say that with a crack of irony, but how do we apply it with what's going on in society today?
And specifically, what do you mean about how we apply our life?
Yeah, I mean, how we listen. It's should be common knowledge that we ought to listen more, be more empathetic, know that we shouldn't or aren't the smartest dude in the room. But society's becoming more and more divided. I mean, I think there's an element of for faith in society, lack of family values. I mean, I could go on, and I think I
Sure.
know what to do to help bring society together and to love and to serve others. But that's just my take. That's my
Sure.
that's this much, right? So I want to know, I mean, we all see faults in society right now. How do we not continue that divisiveness by preaching what we think is the right solution or answer? So my question is, what's your take on what's going on right now in society, and how, as individuals, can we help make it better rather than worse?
Well, I think the best way to answer that is we live our faith. We live our characteristics. If, I don't want to make the assumption that everybody here on the air is a person of faith. I want to give you that leeway. But, I personally believe that it starts, as a person of faith. You have to have a faith. The other thing is you have to live that. And as you were talking, Kurt, I thought about my dad. He lived his faith. He lived his life. He lived his characteristics, what they were. He lived those. So I think you said part of it is, and this is hard, and it's not to get caught up in it, but to live our faith the way we know we should. And know that there is a different tomorrow. There's going to be, that's the hope. When scripture talks about hope, that hope is not a verb. Well, I hope I win the lottery. That's not the hope it's talking about. That hope in scripture is a noun. There's something better. There'll be a new tomorrow. And so living our faith, and I tell you, sometimes it's hard, and sometimes it's frustrating, and sometimes we want to throw up our hands. I hit that point, about every other day. But then, no, the only easy day was yesterday. And so what I do is, and I think what we should do is we just continue to press forward. The other thing is that there was something in counseling that that's very important, and that is trust the process. As a person of faith, you trust that process of faith and how God is going to sort this out. Because right now, scripture says there is trouble. In the world, you will have trouble and tribulation. And it's easy to get caught up in it. We are human. But living our faith, living our relationships, caring for a person, I believe, does more than preaching to them. When my dad put his arm around me, it meant more than when he says, "What are you doing? Get out of there, and quit doing that. And where's the belt?" That always took me further and helped me to learn more when he did that.
No, that's helpful. I get what you're saying, and I think through my faith and how to apply that in the workplace, and how to love and assist and serve others. That's a big deal. So,
well, it's not, and it's not easy. I don't want to make it sound like it's easy. And there's one more thing that I wanted to mention is you can't do it alone. I believe that, SEAL team was called a team for a reason. And when we went through SEAL team training, we went through together, and we ran on the beach together. And, Will Rogers said we're all ignorant, just in different subjects. Well, we all have capabilities, and, some guys ran well. I was a bigger person. I ran like a tractor, and I was so slow I had to speed up to stop. And but there were the guys that could run. They were good runners, but they'd come alongside of me and say, come on, Mike, we can do this. And we keep running, and you just put your head down and you lean forward and you run. And that's how life is. You can't do it by yourself. I believe, from my faith, you must have the Lord with you, and you walk with the Lord. The Holy Spirit walks, and part of that, the definition of Holy Spirit, or the word, it means coming alongside of. And we wore a rope on our belt that we used to tie knots, and you practice tying knots because you tie knots in the det cord that you use. And so you had to learn to tie knots. Well, one guy came alongside me. We were on a 14-mile run, and he came along and he reached up and grabbed my rope and started running alongside of me. And that's what the Lord does, is comes alongside of you and runs with you. And so being dependent upon that is also, I think, very important. And that has to be, and what that is recharging your own batteries. You know, going to the Lord every day and living that faith, and that, you know, and because we can't continue in difficult situations. I always say, sometimes you got to turn the TV off, and you can't do it alone.
You know, Kurt's question got me thinking. There's got to have been times, probably lots of times, serving as a chaplain, that somebody's coming to you and they got a problem, and your inclination is to say, well, you were stupid, you got what you deserved. But, you know, getting to that divisiveness that we're in today, but that wasn't your orientation towards helping others. I'm assuming that wouldn't have been the best strategy, would have been to say, hey, that was stupid, you got what you deserve. So maybe that goes back to that muscle memory of you're always oriented towards helping others rather than being right.
Well, yes, and I will confess that there were those moments, but it gets back to what are you about? And my focus was the relationship. And you know, the other thing is the Lord had mercy on me. Why do I think, or what I think, that I should be judgmental against somebody else? And that really helped me to accept the person for who they are, who they were, you know, and the situation that they did. You know, it's kind of like whoever doesn't have sin in life can throw the first rock. You know, you've heard that scripture. Yeah. If you're perfect, then you can be the first one to throw the rock. Well, nobody threw a rock. And Jesus asked the lady, you know, where are your accusers? Well, I applied that in my life. There are, yes, I would get frustrated with people and go, what'd you think was going to happen when you did that? But I didn't do that, and just realized that the Lord has said that to me a couple of times. What did you think was going to happen? So you relate to people the way you want to be related to, and the way people has related to you. Because I've had people come up alongside and help me in life. But you love them for who they are.
So what took you out of the Army then after that long career?
Age.
Okay.
Age. I retired at age 60. I went on with the Army at 42. I went in the Navy when I was 22, got out in 77. So see, from 77 to 93, I was civilian, and then went back on active duty, 82nd of all, and started running again. And remember, I said I wasn't a good runner, and but at Fort Bragg there wasn't sand that we had to run in. It was you still ran and got to run in tennis shoes, but it was a little different. But you know, the Lord's hand was in that, because I don't know that I could have done that on my own. You know, there's some things in life we can't do on our own, but it has to be, you know, somebody coming alongside of you, or your faith that comes alongside of you. The Lord comes alongside of you. You know, you just can't do it alone. And So I went from 42 to 60, and I retired in 2010, 2011, September 2011. So if you're doing the math, I'm 70 years old. And so age got me, or else I'd still be there flying in the helicopters.
You know, you hit on that teamwork aspect, and I've heard Jocko talk about that in relation to buds too, that some guys are good runners, some guys are strong, some guys are tall, and some guys are short. In fact, he talks about those log drills and how everybody can't hold the log the same. Talk about just building a team of people that aren't like you.
Yeah. The best analogy I could speak of is in SEAL team training, we had boat crews. What we called them the boat crews, and everybody was assigned to a boat crew, and it was the rubber boat that I don't know if you've seen those rubber boats that they use. You get in and you paddle and you straddle the tube, the outer tube. We had short guys and we had tall guys. Now, this kind of goes to answer your question. Everybody needs to find their place where they're good at and be proud of that. Now, okay, Mike, what's that got to do with size? Well, we put the short guys in the front, the tall guys in the back. So it was funny when it was one of those forehead slappers that we first picked up the boat, and there was a short guy here and a tall guy here and a medium-sized guy here. So one guy, there was a foot between his helmet and the boat, and you start figuring out, wait a minute, we get into our role here and we can carry this boat equally. And that's the way it is with life. You find out, what your role is, and you be proud of what that is, and you serve in that. And for me, it's been a life of service, and that's why I can't stop now. I'm, on city council, and I was ready to leave, but then the Lord again said, "You're not through." And I feel like has called me into this new calling. And so going back to the thing about finding your place, that's how we did that. That boat crew illustration is a good illustration. Now you can't. I love this thought. Will Rogers, and I know a few of you have heard of Will Rogers, but said you might be on the right track, but if you just sit there, you're going to get run over. So you find your place, you find the right track, and then you move out. Because the only easy day was yesterday.
Well, we got good comments here. Libby says you don't sound like an old guy, and I agree. So.
Well, thank you.
Marilyn has a question.
Yes, I have to get on here. You caught me, Randy. Well, first of all, Mike, I want to thank you for your service. That is huge. I'd like to know more about what you're doing now, your nonprofit. And I would also like to get your comments. One of the things that I found when Kurt was talking about the diverse, all of the problems now and the division, it seems like that, from my experience, that people live in silos and we don't really understand what's going on with other parts or people in other situations than we're in. And I'd just like for you to comment on that a little bit.
Well, it goes back to how you develop your life, circumstances. I've always believed circumstances don't make or break us; they reveal us, and it's how we grow and how we relate to other people. Life is about relationships, so it's how we relate to people. One of the best books I have ever read that I just got through reading was Martin Luther King Jr.'s. Dr. King had the book Strides Towards Freedom, and it was about the bus boycott in the 60s. And he talked about, we're here for purpose, and it's relationships. And and yes, there was a lot that they got caught up in, and there was a lot of turmoil and a lot of division. But his approach was peaceful resistance. So peaceful, of course, Martin Luther King Jr. would talk about that because he was a minister and he knew the gospel and he knew the love of the Lord. But also resistance. There is action that you take with that. So, or put together with that. So I'd recommend that book. And it's the way he lived his life, was looking at other people. And so we've come back to one of the first points we've talked about is, it's a relationship and how you relate to other people, and your focus is people. And tell me your first question. I've forgotten that one. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I wanted to know more about what you're doing now.
Okay, that's what it was. Randy, is it okay to talk about the campaign? I didn't know what I'm allowed to.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we don't get into politics much on here, but it's what you've been in. You've been in politics with the city council, and now you're trying to take that up a notch, I think. So,
well,
about that.
And that's where all of this has led to, is that I'm on city council. My second tour of duty was city council, but I feel led just as much of a lead or calling as the ministry, but I feel led to run for House of Representatives. And that will be coming up this year. And I have a website that kind of talks about and it shows the different stages in my life. www.thompsonforkansashouse.com. Now you got to put all that in or you'll get the weatherman, Mike Thompson. And if you get a blue screen, that's the weatherman senator. If you get a red screen, that's mine. But it comes back to the idea of serving people. I was ready to go into my shop. I like to work on old cars. And so I was ready to go to my shop and lock the door behind me and work on my old cars. But again, just like leaving the Navy, and Randy, you asked why I left the Navy, the Lord's hands in that. And so the Lord said, no, don't lock that door. You're going to go back out that door. You're going to go back out and serve people. And so that's what I'm doing right now, is running for office. I'm running and that election will be this fall, winter. And we're looking forward to it, and it's exciting. And it's something I didn't think that I could do. Kind of a side note on that. I went to junior high and high school in Topeka. My dad was, like I said, was Santa Fe, and got transferred to Topeka. And I'd drive by the Capitol building and I'd think, gosh, it'd be neat to be up there. I wonder what that's like. But I'm not smart enough to do that. And then the Lord said, it's not ability, it's availability. And so when you serve people, and that's what, and so I said yes to that. Now, my wife kind of questioned me on that, but that's her role. And as we both came to see that that's where the Lord was leading us, that's how we affirm that calling. And so that's what I'm doing now. And it's exciting. And I'm going way into a zone that's not my comfort zone. But, Lord came alongside of me at other times in my life. And there's no reason why that God is not going to do that this time. And so I trust that. And that, see how everything kind of comes back around and connects to Kurt, like the things that you're saying. So when I look and see the world today, stay back here and concentrate on what we need to concentrate on. And a lot of times it's helping people, it's relating to people hurting out there. So hook up with a swim buddy And if you need to talk to a swim buddy, you need to talk with them. But that's part of the self-help. But then don't get caught up in the whirlwind of it. But just know there is a new tomorrow. There'll be a better day. So I think, Marilyn, if that answered, I hope answered your questions.
You know, one of the things interesting about local politics, like when you're on the city council or the state level, like you live amongst the folks you're serving, which is different than the Washington level. And when you talk to folks, I've talked to Sly James about that, you know, like you go into a restaurant, people just run by the road in front of their house and paved, you know. So how much did these experiences prepare you for things like the city council and dealing with folks that what matters most to them is what matters most to them, and you have to learn how to help them?
Well, it goes clear back to the hospital setting, going into the military. My first job, when I was married, was working in a full service gas station. So it goes back to even that. You learn to look at the people. You concentrate on them, not yourself. And so I think that answered your question.
A lot of great comments on here. Folks were really inspired by your journey, and you have done I think you just built that muscle memory. You talked about the muscle memory. I think just become automatic, and serving others just became your muscle memory.
And it does, and it has. And so to serve now and at the state level, yes, it goes clear back, and it's muscle memory. And I remember now that was your question about that's the preparation. Life is your preparation. And there's always a takeaway that we can take away every day of our life and connect it with something. And I called it connecting the dots. This happened back then, so this is what I should do now. So.
Well, good job. Keep helping others, keep serving others. You may have another run back in the Army still left in you. You never know. So
I still have my boots. The uniform doesn't fit anymore, but
okay. Well, it's great to spend time with you, Mike. Good luck with everything you're doing. It was great to see all of you today, and look forward to seeing you again next week.
Well, thank you very much. And everybody, it's so nice to meet you. And it's very humbling to be in this situation. And so thank you all. And keep up the good work of what you're doing. And don't sell yourself short. You are doing some great things.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well,
Randy.
thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Mike, good to see you, Mike. Good luck. Everybody have a great weekend.
God bless you. Take care.
Bye now.